Welcome to the Period Besties Podcast with Stasha and Katie. Think about it as chatting with your best friends about all the TMI stuff you've never talked about before with two period coaches who've been helping hormones collectively for over 20 years now. I'm Stasha.
And I'm Katie, and we're pulling back the curtain on what it's like in the world of menstrual coaching, from puberty to menopause and everything in between. We're here to show you how period coaching can save the day. We'll share practical tips and information you can put to immediate use to improve your hormones and happiness.
We're removing the mystery, ending the taboo, and shining a light on just how powerful period coaching can be.
So whether you need period coaching or are considering becoming a period coach yourself, these episodes are going to help you. We'll share stories, coach live on air, and bring smart, savvy guests to share their wisdom too. Let's start today's episode.
Welcome back to the Period Besties Podcast. Today, Katie and I are kicking off a little perimenopause series. So we're going to share today some questions we've gotten from people, a little basics on perimenopause. We have a great interview coming up with Carrie Jones, who's a doctor and shared a lot about perimenopause. We're going to talk about Not Your Mom's HRT in an upcoming episode as well. So we've got some really good, juicy stuff happening and coming up. We also have a workshop coming up. Katie and I will be teaching live about perimenopause and eating for it. So we're calling it Nourish and Flourish, eating for perimenopause. So if you're one of the many people, including myself, who's been doing a lot of, oh my gosh, I got to figure out how to eat now and revamping things. This workshop is going to be what you want to come and check out and be a part of. And especially since it'll be live, you can be there and ask questions. It'll be a lot of fun. And we'll be sharing recipes and meal plans and all sorts of good stuff. So you're going to want to jump into that. So stay tuned to the end for more on that. But let's kick off today's episode with a little just check-in. Where are we in our cycles?
I started my period late Saturday night. So I'm on day, if I was sleeping, it would be day 2, but I was awake. So it's day 3. Like when I'm just like tracking it. I always laugh when I do that because I'm like, oh, when do I put this in? Because my period always starts not really like light. So it's not a light flow moving into a heavier flow. So it's okay. It's here, but much better. I had way less, almost like no breast tenderness this period cycle. So that was good. I felt calmer. Also, surprisingly, because it's been a busy time of the year. Boys started school today, getting everything ready. So I'm feeling like this is a good period. Like this past cycle was better. I also went on vacation in August. So I feel it all adds up, right? Less stress, better period.
So true. I'm day 18, but this is my first cycle where my basal body temperature is clearly telling me I haven't ovulated. So the cervical mucus came, but I still had a bit of that kind of COVID hangover and I wasn't feeling very active or energized. So I didn't have the feeling of it. And then, my day 18 and my basal body temperature has not really, there was one day where it was like a 20th of a point higher. Like it was just a little tiny bit higher. And then actually the last 3 days, it's gone down just a hair. Not a lot, but just a hair. So I think maybe a 10th a day. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Will I have my first anovulatory period? Will I have my first, or will I just not have a period? Will it come late? Who knows?
So you have to keep us posted. I feel like this is a great conversation starter for what we're talking about today with perimenopause, because last cycle, my boobs hurt so bad. They're so tender. So it's every time we connect and we talk about where we're at, it's totally different than a year, 2, 3 years ago in terms of what's going on, because we're both in perimenopause.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. And that's some of the other things that have been popping up for me that have really shown me that it's perimenopause is actually the increased waking up in the night. Mm-hmm. I'm normally a sleep, done, don't wake up. Around the full moon, I will. And during my period, I do. But normally the rest of the time, I just sleep like a log. And I've been waking up in the middle of the night fairly regularly for the last couple of months. That's definitely one of those perimenopause signs. And then actually, we had a question, which we'll talk more in depth about later, about hives. But going into that research, I realized I'm having a lot of the histamine perimenopause, my allergies, which I've never had until last year. And they were very mild last year, but this year they're crazy off the charts. I'm like on 3 different antihistamines every day at this point, just trying to live. Hives. I've never had hives before, but last year I got hives for the first time, and I had them 4 times within a year, essentially, couldn't tell you. Didn't do anything different, didn't eat anything different, didn't go anywhere different. I was very like, there's no reason for this. Nothing's changed except the hormonal levels in perimenopause triggering histamine effects. So it was really quite interesting to see that as well. And then the more IBS-like symptoms. And this is where endometriosis is a problem, because endo has a lot of IBS-like symptoms. And in the last couple of months, I've had some more. And even in the last year, when I thought back about it, I was like, oh yeah, I definitely have had more pain, just like gut pain that I just chalked up to, oh, maybe I ate something weird that day, even though I cook all my own food and I eat at home, and there was really no reason for it. But the more I was researching, the more I went, oh, this is all histamine response reactions. That might be exactly what it is the perimenopause histamine reaction. So we'll talk about that later in the episode. But yeah, for me personally, I'm starting to see more and more of those little things adding up, and all of them circling back to this is a symptom of perimenopause.
Yeah, I think for me, my first sign was I couldn't figure it out at first because we had just moved cross country. Life was drastically different. Like things were changed really fast. But I've always had some PMS where I'm like, just go away. Like, I don't want to talk to you. Leave me alone. Like, I'm in a bad mood. I just want to sit by myself. But we talked about this, but I was having like rage, but it was happening like 5 days before my period. So it would like the 5 days before my period, I would be a mess and I would have zero tolerance for anything. And then I was like, okay, leading up to it, it was like that 5-day mark. And I had to really dial it back and really work on like how much I had on my plate and my stress and all of that. So I've been working a lot on that. And that this cycle was not there. I was still kind of like, leave me alone. But I always have like children hanging on me all the time. So I just don't know if it's like I'm overstimulated or if I'm just like PMSing. Like I can't tell you the difference. It feels the same. But that was my like first sign. And then obviously my periods getting a little bit more irregular, getting shorter. My cycles are definitely way shorter than they used to be. But it was that rage feeling where I was like, oh, this is scary. Like I was like scaring myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you said that, because you're right. It was the shorter cycles that was my first sign. That was, I think, 2 years ago. I had my first 23-day cycle. And then last year I had a 23-day cycle. And I've been charting and tracking for a decade or so. So I had never had one shorter than 24 days. And that was maybe once a year. And that's right. That was that very first thing I did notice was the 23-day cycle. And I was like, oh boy.
Yeah. Well, that was like when we moved here and I had an 18-day cycle. And I was like, absolutely not. This is not happening.
No.
I haven't had one since, but it's interesting because this is what we do all day, right? And I thought I was managing the move and the stress. And as much as I did probably better, knowing what I know, it was still a shock to my system.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. You still have to live through it. And which brings us to actually probably the most commented thing we got when we were out requesting questions for this episode was just people sending in statements like, this sucks. It's annoying.
And it is. Especially if you have been having a pretty regular cycle, you don't really know, you're like, oh, my period's here. Like you've had an easier, like not everybody has a great cycle every
Sure.
or period. You know what I mean? But if you are that person, I know a lot of them that like they didn't really notice anything drastic until they got into perimenopause. So yeah, it would totally suck because you're like, wait a second, this was all fine and working. I didn't have to pay much attention to it. And now all of a sudden my body is telling me I have to make changes because you notice it. So that has to be a shock if you are that person. And there are people that don't really notice it. They just get their period and they're like, okay. And now welcome to perimenopause. So I understand the comment.
Me too. I have a friend, just to reassure listeners as well, I have a friend who woke up one day and realized she hadn't had a period in over a year. And that was her perimenopausal journey. That was it. She just woke up one day and went, boy, I haven't had a period in a really long time. And then she went and looked it up and realized she was officially in menopause. And it just
symptoms?
Nothing, not a single thing, just floated through it. So you can have that experience. Unfortunately, most of us do not have that experience. So most of us have issues. And I think that it's good to say that while you can have a really easy experience, you can also be in a it sucks camp with most of us. And I just want you to know you're in good company because that is the experience. Our culture is not set up for us. It's not set up for cycling. It's not set up for menstruation. It's not set up for childbirth, pregnancy, maternal leave. None of that stuff is set up in the United States at all. Other countries are making a little bit of inroads on those kinds of things, but our society is just not set up for this. And of course, perimenopause, going through all of these fluctuations, these ups and downs, when really what you need to be doing is resting and nourishing and strength training and these kinds of like ultra self-care things. When, how, in your capitalist job, in your I need to work 9 to 5 and take care of the kids and the aging parents and all the other things. And then you're expected to deal with all of these hormonal fluctuations, these ups and downs, and these random periods without letting anyone know about it because we don't talk about these things. It adds to the stress, the secrecy, the attempts to feel normal, look normal, act normal when everything is not normal adds to that stress, which only makes those perimenopausal symptoms worse. So frankly, step one, stop pretending. Just out there and share.
Totally. I feel like all the conversations I've been having with my friends lately is what the F is going on? I don't feel the same. What can I do? And I think what we want to like, as much as we're going to talk about like things that don't feel good during perimenopause, there are things that you can do, like you just mentioned, but like your diet, your lifestyle, your sleep, hormone replacement therapy, like there are things that you can do. And I think that I was speaking with a client last week. I don't want to take any medication. I was like, hormones, I wouldn't call them medication. And I think that also has gotten obviously a bad reputation when that study came out 20 years ago. And I think the thing is, you do not have to have an experience like your mom might have had as well. So I think we have to rethink this. And if that was like the only experience you've witnessed, because not many people talk about it, let's talk about it. Let's have the conversations about it, because it doesn't have to be miserable. There are so many more options for us now than there used to be. But let's give as much information as we can, and let's talk about it as much as we can so you don't feel as alone. And yeah, let's talk about it. You might want to talk about it with everyone in your office, but I'm sure all the women that are in similar ages are also experiencing what you're going through as well.
For sure. And a lot of the doctors that we've interviewed, and you'll hear this in Dr. Carrie Jones' episode, time with your friends is one of the best things you can do for helping to alleviate symptoms. Having that community, having that time with your friends, having that girl time, that's actually a very important step in helping to balance hormones, reducing symptoms, those kinds of things. So having these conversations with your community, which can be us. You're welcome to send us messages, DMs, emails, whatever. But having those conversations, it can actually help reduce those symptoms as well.
Who doesn't feel better talking about your period and sharing and the experience? And oh my God, are you feeling like this too? Just knowing that I'm not the only one that's feeling that rage normalizes it for me. And it's okay. I'm not not that I thought I was a bad person. Like that internal conversation where you're like, you just like yelled at your kids.
Yeah.
You couldn't control it. There's things that we can do. And therapy has been really helpful for me, like with that in general, like therapy plus diet and lifestyle changes with just trying to manage my life and my toddlers.
Yeah. Step one, you're not crazy. You're not crazy. You're not doing anything wrong. It's not that you're a bad person. It's just those shifts. So what are some of the other signs of being in perimenopause? Because that's one of the questions we got when we were asking people. And I think that's a great question because there's a lot of hot flashes, insomnia. We hear those a lot. But not everybody gets hot flashes. Not everybody deals with insomnia. So what are some of the perimenopause symptoms that you think are important our listeners should know about?
I think the first thing I want to say is the brain fog.
Oh, yeah.
Because I hear this often, especially my clients that are at like work corporate jobs and have a pretty high up level, C-level people, where all of a sudden they're like having the brain fog and they can't remember. They'll be giving a presentation and then they're trying to remember a word, which happens to me a lot actually. But that brain fog is so hard. And I've experienced it with my thyroid. That was one of my first signs that I really noticed before I got diagnosed, was having that brain fog. So it could be two things. It could be getting your full thyroid checked, do a full thyroid panel, because it could be thyroid also is more prevalent as we get older as well, but it's also a sign of perimenopause. So it's one of those things where we want to keep an eye on it. I think the hard thing, and we've talked about this before, is that when you have brain fog, it's hard to know that you have brain fog because just the description in itself, you feel foggy. I think it's a good time to connect with your girlfriends, your partner, and just ask them, have I forgotten words? Do I feel like I'm not in it? Do you notice me just staring out, trying to figure things out? Because that happens to me sometimes. I'm just stare at the wall. I'm like, okay, it's going to come to me. It's going to come to me. But I think that's one of the things we don't talk enough about is that brain fog. And I see it often with my clients is the brain fog.
Yeah, completely agree with that. I think that one's a huge one, especially since we know women have higher rates of dementia and Alzheimer's in older ages. Something like 2/3 of people are women with, I think it's Alzheimer's. So it's definitely memory, brain fog, those kinds of things are absolutely a big part of perimenopause. And in fact, they did a study on mice ages ago now, probably 2 years ago, but time is weird now. But they did a study where they had different groups of mice. And in one group, they had removed the uterus. And those mice had such diminished memory that the researchers thought they did the study wrong, did it completely from scratch all over again because they thought they'd made a mistake and they got the exact same results. So even if you had like a hysterectomy, any kind of removal of the uterus for whatever reason, you may be in early onset menopause because of surgery, cancer, those kinds of things. You may find that same issue, having memory issues, brain fog, that kind of thing. So definitely a menopause symptom. I think one of the first signs is that shortening of the cycle. So after cycle, note it. I even have a spreadsheet that has just my shortest cycle and my longest cycle for each year. And then maybe a couple notes from that year, but being able to see it really easily and clearly, it was like, oh, I've had my shortest cycles ever for the first time. So tracking your cycle so that you can notice when that first cycle that's just a day shorter, but it's a day shorter than everything you've ever experienced before happens, could be a really great heads up that you're starting perimenopause before you may even feel any effects.
Yeah. And you should definitely share that with your doctor too, because they should know whatever you were before, 27, 28, 29 days, longer, shorter, if it's drastically or even just a little bit different, they should know that too.
Yeah. Which goes hand in hand with the ovulation, right? So tracking ovulation, not just the cervical mucus, but again, this is why I stand on my soapbox and tell people you need to track basal body temperature, even if it's not got anything to do with fertility, because it is such a great sign of thyroid issues. And it's also a really good sign of perimenopause because you'll have all of the other symptoms of ovulation. You'll have cervical mucus. You'll have a rise in libido. You'll have a rise in energy. You'll have all those same physical traits of ovulation, but your basal body temperature won't go up. And that will be another one. But you may just get your period like you would every other month.
Yep.
That lining in the uterus builds up. It takes months and months and months without any ovulation before you run out of lining, essentially, to bleed out every month with your period. So you won't know that you're not ovulating if you're only checking cervical mucus or if you're only relying on how you feel. So basal body temperature can really help when you miss that first ovulation in a cycle, which might be next month. We'll see.
Yeah. And that was surprising to me when that happened. I was like, oh no. Okay. Like, I know I'm 45, right? I know it. But like my grandmother always said, even when she was in her 90s, she's like, the only reason why I felt older is I looked at myself and I didn't recognize myself anymore. Your brain will always keep you feeling young, quote unquote, right? But that's why it's so important to track all of these changes so that you actually know what's happening internally, which leads to a really good point, Stasha, if tracking ovulation, because progesterone, right? The only way your body produces progesterone is ovulation. And I think the biggest sign for me, besides the shorter cycle, was my stress response. Like, definitely have noticed that shifting a lot. I feel like I've not been good with stress. Some people can manage stress better. I've never been okay managing stress. I do all the things, but stress is hard for me to manage, even with all the ways I cope with it. But that's what I noticed was like this increased anxiety with it too, that I wasn't necessarily understanding, but have noticed a lot more too. So that started happening with me postpartum. And then I feel like it just went straight into perimenopause.
Do you think that's part of the mood instability, that lack of progesterone there?
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, I have said for years that the minute I can get a doctor to prescribe me progesterone, I'm doing that stuff like it's drugs.
Yeah. And my doctor actually did prescribe it. I need to pick it up because I think I'm ready to cycle it. I'll probably start if I'm ovulating. Mm-hmm. I'll know exactly because I'm tracking my basal body, right? But if I'm not ovulating that month, I'm still going to cycle that in. So not throughout the whole cycle, but definitely cycling it. That's just based on what I've been reading. It seems like that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, that's certainly my plan. Now that I've had this cycle happening where I'm seeing no uptick in my basal body temperature, I think it's time to head down to Planned Parenthood and make an appointment and say, hey, I want to get some progesterone cream. Let's hook a girl up.
On that note, the other thing that we talked a lot with Dr. Carrie Jones was testing. So that could be something else to think about. Like, the question was, how do I know? Go get a blood test first. If your insurance covers it, awesome. And just checking your progesterone, your estrogen, do a full thyroid panel, get blood work done. That could help you. Obviously, it depends on where you are in your cycle. She even mentioned time of day could change the results, especially with thyroid and where you are in your cycle. But that could be something that could be beneficial to answer that question. Like, how do you actually know? If you haven't done any blood work, do it every single year around the same time. So even if you just start this year, get it put in your calendar for next year as a follow-up. So you're tracking that as well. But that could be another way of just having a deeper understanding of where you're at hormonally.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. So I hope that's helpful because there's a ton of symptoms of perimenopause, but these shortening of cycles, the skipping ovulation, testing your hormonal levels, those are universal. That's what happens to us all. And so those I think are we hear about those hot flashes, we hear about those other things, but these are the universal things. So definitely knowing your ovulation history, knowing your cycle history, keeping track of it, keeping an eye on it, and getting your blood work, or doing a Dutch test or whatever it is, but getting your hormone levels tested. Those are the things that are going to really be very clear and the signs. So even if you are like my friend Stacy and have zero symptoms, you would still know what's going on.
Yeah, I want to meet her. I want to ask her all the questions.
You'll meet her at the wedding.
So talk to me about your lifestyle.
She is a very blessed person who she's just so smart. She did one of those just genius businesses that she sold for a lot of money. And now she gets to hook up other genius businesses with investors and travel, and she just enjoys life extravagantly. So
well, that's awesome. And I think that is there's something to be said in the amount of stress that most of us are under and how that affects us every single day. It doesn't matter if you're going through perimenopause or not. Like, you're 25 or 45, stress is not good for our hormones. End of story, period. Because I've noticed I made a lot of changes in my personal life this year. And that is why I think my cycle and my period was better, because I've been doing a lot of things because I had to. I was like, I can't live like this. I have to make changes. And I thought I was doing all the things. And I think there's always room for shifts, right? Like, small little things. It didn't happen overnight, obviously, but I had to make a lot of changes. Who knows if they'll work 6 months from now, but right now I feel a little bit better.
Yeah, that's same here. In fact, one of our other questions was from a client of mine who asked about hives and perimenopause. And it made me realize that I had had hives for the first time in my life in the last year. And I was like, oh, because then the more I thought about it, the more I realized I have a lot of friends who've been saying the same things, that histamine response and that allergies and all these kinds of things. So it was really fascinating to me. And I thought it was such a good question. And it's I see it so often, and it's not something that's necessarily obvious. Or I know that some of my circles, right, Dr. Darlene Brighton, Dr. Laura, they talk about the histamine estrogen connection, but unless you're actively following people, right, it's not something that you would necessarily know or come up. So I think 99% of people probably don't know about the histamine estrogen connection there. And when you're menstruating, if you have excess estrogen, if you have high levels of bleeding, if you have endometriosis, there's certain things that can trigger histamine reactions in the body during your fertile, we'll say, years, that from you get those early periods all the way through perimenopause, you can have that histamine response. But in perimenopause, a lot of people end up with that histamine response, even if they don't have those underlying health issues, right? Because your estrogen is going up and down like crazy, and estrogen and histamine play off each other. And in fact, high estrogen creates high histamine, which creates high estrogen, which creates high histamine. So you end up with this upward spiral of histamine estrogen response. And then when you're going through perimenopause and your estrogen is spiking, you're spiking your histamine response. And then that can create an estrogen response, right? So even in perimenopause, you can end up in that thing. So histamine response there's a lot. Hives, like Grace asked about, is one, but skin rashes, just your general allergies, stuffy nose, sneezing, coughing, runny nose, all of those just typical seasonal allergies we think of can be increased and worsened. Or like me, you can get them for the first time in your life because hello, perimenopause. But that histamine response actually can be part of the reason you get hot flashes. Mm-hmm. It's one of those. Headaches and migraines. If you're noticing cyclical migraines and headaches, it could be a histamine response. Bloating, IBS symptoms like pain, gas, diarrhea, those kinds of things can be a histamine response. Dizziness, insomnia, of course, fatigue and brain fog can be a histamine response as well. And worsening cramps. There's just so many different things, but I think those are the main ones that I've seen talking to friends and circles and clients. But yeah, so you could just have that histamine response that's happening in perimenopause. So again, you're not crazy. I thought I was losing my mind. Histamine response. And for me, I was like, okay, that answers a lot of questions. I've never had allergies before. I've never had allergies this bad before. I've never had hives. I didn't even know what it was. A friend of mine had to tell me what was happening. So some of these things were very clearly allergen responses. And like Grace, who got hives for the first time as well, very clearly an allergy, a histamine response. So that histamine response can be a big part of perimenopause. And it's a tough one, and one that you can take antihistamines and see if you see any improvement. But there's also things like increasing your vitamin B6, your vitamin C. Those can be, in fact, vitamin B6 was one of the things that every time I looked into what to do kept coming up over and over and over again. So I have a B complex, but I'm going to get an added B6 and try adding that on top of the B complex that I have. So I'll let you know. I've also been drinking nettle tea. That's something that came up as well. So I've been adding in nettle tea the last couple of days. I can't report back on its effectiveness yet personally, but trying those kinds of things. And of course, you can reduce those histamine foods and see if that makes a difference. And that's your vinegars, fermented foods, wine. I'm so sorry. Wine is, I can tell when I have a glass of wine, I can't breathe. And not even a glass of wine, I have a glass of wine and I can't breathe anymore. So I know that's a big one for me. What else? Oh, spinach and tomatoes, eggplant and citrus can trigger a histamine response, even though they're not histamine laden foods. There's some things that I'm definitely going to be trying. I'm not going to drink wine unless I know I don't have anything to do the next day so that I can deal with the aftermath of it. But yeah, I love fermented foods and vinegars, and avocados is a high histamine food. And I was like, you pry the avocado out of my cold dead hand.
I know, right? I don't know what I would do if I couldn't eat avocado.
No, but I would rather try everything else first.
Yeah, the nettle tea, because I do that in the spring, does help a lot. Yeah.
In my cup right now.
I think the alcohol one is a big one. My body hates alcohol. Every time I drink, it's no. And I don't even drink a lot, and I'll have a little bit. And it's, yeah, no, you can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
So I think that's the other thing to think about too, when you're like, am I in perimenopause? It's okay. Like what's my tolerance? Sugar, alcohol, like things that you probably could consume and have more often now don't feel as good the next day, or keep you up at night more, or insomnia, waking up in the middle of the night, all of those things. That's one of the things that's the hardest, I think, to think about is, okay, I used to be able to do this. Now I can't. What's my relationship now with some of these things that I did enjoy once in a while? So I think that's a big thing when we think about our bodies changing. And who knows, like when we get to the other side and we've gone a whole year without having our period and we're in menopause, things might be different, and you might be able to tolerate things differently because things have settled down. But right now, with estrogen and progesterone shifting and changing, it's going to feel different. And I think that's something mentally to think about when you're thinking about perimenopause. It's okay, what is my relationship to these things, to these foods, to some of those vices that feel important, that we can do something different maybe instead.
Yeah, you really do have to evaluate those relationships. Wow. If a glass of wine at the end of the night was how you de-stressed, now how are you going to de-stress? What are you going to replace it with? Because you can't just cut it out. You need to replace it with something. So what are you going to replace it with? Ninja of honor, because we're not going to call her a maid of honor, was like, what are you going to do for your bachelorette party? And I was like, well, we're not drinking, so I don't know.
Go to the spa.
Yeah, I don't need an excuse to go to the spa. I want this to be something that it's like a good excuse to go and do. So.
Yeah, we'll have to think about it. But yeah, like it's one of those things where if If this was 20 years ago, it'd be a different type of bachelor party.
Right. Exactly. There's decisions that have to be made and there's some choices that have to change. And rather than not doing it, what are you going to do instead? So, don't deprive yourself. Don't say, oh, I'm just going to cut it out. Instead, what are you going to substitute? And for me, the first time I took a month off of drinking, and this is coming from a New York City bartender and then Los Angeles bartender. I was like, I don't know. I got grape kombucha.
Oh, I love kombucha. Yeah.
I do too. And the grape kombucha at least had that flavor. It felt a little bit, no, it wasn't wine, but at least it had that hint to it. So I actually got a lot of grape kombucha the first time that I did that and got rid of it. Now, I don't know that I would necessarily recommend that in all cases because kombucha is a fermented food and it can create a histamine response. So I don't know that I would necessarily do that now. But in my 30s, it was great. So if you're in perimenopause and you're trying to figure out a substitution, it might have to be a mocktail. Or if you're in a legal state, maybe it's time to switch over to gummies. It might have to be something else. A walk, a hike, a hot tub, a bathroom spa day for yourself. I've started doing the castor oil packs in the evening, not every evening, but I'm trying to aim for about 3 days a week. Yeah, I'm loving it.
Take a hot shower now. So I think to dialing in your sleep, your evening routine, but I'll take a hot shower now. I do the castor oil pack. I do the heat. I read. I really just like slowing down, getting my phone out of the room, all of those things. So important.
Yeah, sleep is something that Katie and I both get asked about often. And it's something that comes up throughout your years, no matter where you are in your menstrual years. But in perimenopause, it becomes an extra big challenge. Of course, to answer the questions of how do I get to sleep again, that first thing is, what's your bedtime ritual? Are you unwinding? And if it took you 15 minutes before, it's time to double that. Mm-hmm. If it took you half an hour before, maybe double that. It's certainly one of those things where in perimenopause, your sleep gets more disrupted. So you have to make sure that you're doing all of those things in order to get yourself wound down. And I don't have a problem falling asleep. I have a problem staying asleep. So for me, having that sleep routine didn't feel, I charted and did my evening stuff and got off the computers and the screens and those kinds of things, but it really didn't take me very long. And it was hard for me to even realize that's what I needed to do because I didn't have a problem falling asleep. It was staying asleep. So it almost felt, but I don't have a problem going to sleep. I don't need to lengthen that routine. But in reality, I needed to lengthen that routine. So even if you're like me and you don't have a problem falling asleep, you're having a problem staying asleep, lengthen that ritual before you go to bed so that you're having more time away from the screen, more time of doing some self-care stuff, magnesium lotion, castor oils, whatever it is, but make sure you're giving yourself a nice evening routine before you go to bed, because that's a huge part of having a good night's sleep, especially in perimenopause.
Yeah. And those screens, I think we totally underestimate how much that's messing with our sleep. The other question that we got was about high blood pressure, cholesterol, noticing changes with that. And yes, this is a thing, both cholesterol and blood pressure. A lot of times it's both is that decline in estrogen, honestly, with high blood pressure and high cholesterol. That's why it can be very, very beneficial and very important to work with a doctor who specializes in perimenopause to talk about what you can do, especially if you are having really high blood pressure, if your cholesterol is really high. This is what I noticed postpartum. I was breastfeeding, I was pumping, and my cholesterol went up. And I was like, what is this? And because I wasn't having a period and my estrogen was really low, my progesterone was obviously not there, my prolactin was high. So lots of changes. And then it triggered, it's genetic. It runs in my family. So pregnancy and postpartum triggered that gene to turn on. So I've been working with a cardiologist. I've been working with my doctor, like just really monitoring, because that's what happened to me was all of a sudden I had really high cholesterol and I never had it before. And so as I'm going through perimenopause, I'm being very, very mindful of watching the numbers, doing everything in terms of diet and lifestyle on my end. But that's why it will probably be almost essential for me to add in the estrogen at some point to keep those numbers. I haven't had the high blood pressure, but I've had the high cholesterol. But yes, in both cases, it's that decline in estrogen. And you also become more insulin sensitive. The other thing too, when you think about just women's health and what we've been taught for heart attacks looks very different in women. It's more kind of a tightening feeling versus what men experience in terms of heart attacks. So it's also really talking to your doctor and really learning what the signs are, especially if you are having high blood pressure and all of that stuff too. And unfortunately, our blood vessels age as well. So we've got to pay attention to that. One of our dear, dear, dear friends who's only 47 just had a heart attack 2 weeks ago. So it's definitely something to be mindful about and move your body.
Yeah.
Eat as healthy as you can, but also the hormone replacement therapy can be so important. And I think this is such an important conversation. I'm so glad we had Dr. Carrie Jones on talking all about that, because don't just take it from us. Listen to the doctor, listen to your doctors. But I think that's something that we all should be aware of, because it can be life changing, just knowing that it's the decline in estrogen. So let's get that back into our body so that we can have longevity with all of that. So that's an awesome, awesome question. Who is that from again? It was,
Blue Hair Days off of Instagram.
yeah. So thank you, Blue Hair Days. That's a really, really good question. But it's that decline in the estrogen.
Yeah. I definitely had my first blood work come back with higher levels of cholesterol and blood pressure this last year. So it's certainly one of those things, that decline in hormones and that shift happens. But actually that brings us to the last question. What if I can't take hormones? So I don't know if you have any other questions on your end that you want to answer, because I think that takes us lovely into the food and diet portion of our.
Yeah, no, they were all very similar to.
Yeah. Okay, great.
And we hit them all. But if you can't take hormones, only come to our workshop because we're going to walk you through the food and the lifestyle shifts that can be extremely beneficial to help you through the stage, and what we've been doing, what we've been researching, what we've been taught, all of the things. So important to and then honestly, that's the foundation. Even if you are doing hormone replacement therapy.
Yeah.
You've got to keep that foundation as healthy as you possibly can.
Yeah. One of the things is that even if you take HRT, you're not getting the muscle mass, you're not getting the bone density, you're not getting the cardiovascular health if you're not doing the movement, if you're not doing the dietary things. Even if you're taking HRT, you're still setting yourself up for really bad long-term health. And one of the things that several of the doctors we've interviewed on here have mentioned is that how you treat your body in your 40s is going to set you up for the next 3 decades of your life. So this 1 decade really dictates what the next 30 years of your life are going to look like. And that's diet and exercise. That's not HRT. That's not hormone replacement. That's 100% diet and exercise. Now, hormone replacement, if you can take them, can be helpful. But it's that diet and exercise bit that's going to make that 30 years down the line active, fun, postmenopausal, engaged years, to be the grandma that can pick up her grandkids, to be the outdoor adventuring single lady in your 60s going camping and hiking. Those things that you think, oh, I can't wait until I'm in menopause because I will be able to not have to worry about this and I'm going to do all these other things. You're not going to be able to do them if you're not setting it up in your 40s properly. So making sure that you do that is going to be huge.
Yeah. And I think that's important to really, really, really think about, because when we were talking to the doctors, we're like, whoa, we're in that decade right now. We're in our 40s. What we're doing is really going to have the biggest impact. And I think that's important to pause and reflect on and really think about what you've been doing so far, what's been working, what we want to alter and shift and add things that will really benefit us for the future, not just how are we going to get through perimenopause, but how are we going to have a healthy life? Because I want to be here for a long time.
Yeah.
Healthy. I want to be here healthy for a long time.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it. My family lives, unless you die of breast cancer in your 30s, which I made it through, you die in your 90s, mentally intact. It's just the physical decline. And that's where I would like to be as physically healthy as humanly possible, because I don't want to be mentally intact, trapped in already the endometriosis has left me with 30 plus years now of feeling a bit trapped in a body that doesn't do what I want it to do and can't physically do the things I wish it could. So I'm really looking forward to menopause in a big way. I'm also a little sad that I didn't figure out the endometriosis and stuff earlier, so I could have had better years, but though they're behind me, there's nothing I can do. So it is a bit bittersweet, but I really want menopause, those years to compensate. Yeah. So definitely food and diet. And every doctor that we've talked to has said that HRT is great. And if you can do it, but you have to look at how you're eating. You have to look at how you're moving. And I want to just say that calories in, calories out is useless in perimenopause. It's just not it's not really how women's bodies work anyway. So the whole calories in, calories out thing is based off of men. It's not, and most of those studies were done on 18 to 24-year-old college boys, frankly.
They can eat whatever they want, whenever they want.
Right. So that kind of mentality, again, it's that mental shift, right? Perimenopause doesn't have to be terrible. Perimenopause doesn't have to be a hijacking, terrible time. And calories in, calories out isn't going to work. So if you're out here like trying to run 10 miles and starve yourself and can't figure out why you still feel brain foggy and fatigued and you can't lose any weight, it's because that's not how that works for us. So just knowing, hey, you don't have to starve yourself. In fact, the opposite is true in perimenopause. You need to feed and nourish properly. So if you're in perimenopause and your like knee-jerk reaction is, I'm going to eat less, stop it. You just need to eat differently.
Definitely. And that strength training too is essential and so important, and something that I've been really, really focusing on. And like the cool thing about strength training for me is when I can go up in weights.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I'm getting like, I can feel myself just getting stronger, and it's helping my back, it's my knees, like all of it. But the confidence too, I feel like, of weight training and strength training, I don't know. I feel like a rock star. I'm like, oh, I can do this. Like I can go up in my weights and all of that stuff too. I think is just like a huge confidence booster, especially as we get older, right? It's just being able to lift more and heavier and all of those things. Do it in a safe way. Make sure someone's showing you how to do it with your body, and you don't want to do too much weight at first, but definitely making sure that you're doing that. So helpful. And I don't know. I never thought I would have fun lifting, but I actually enjoy it.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed it, and I've been enjoying getting back into it. And in fact, one of our period coaching school students currently is a fitness instructor. If you want a little extra help from somebody, let me know and I'll pass her information along, because she does online consults. So it doesn't matter where you are in the world. But yeah, it's really nice to have some support and help in that area. And yeah, Katie and I are going to dive into a 2-hour workshop coming up in October, where you can jump in and we're going to talk food, diet, great things to eat, recipes, all that kind of stuff. It's going to be one of those mind-blowing things where you're like, oh, I thought I was going to have to eat a bucket of kale. And in fact, probably no kale will be harmed in the making of that workshop.
I like that. We will share the link, but it's going to be on October 22nd, Tuesday night from 7 to 9 Eastern Standard Time. So save the date, and you can get all the details in the show notes. But we're really excited about it. This is going to be our first Period Besties workshop, and we thought this is a really important topic to start with. And as we were planning this workshop out, we realized that we're probably going to need to do 2 of these workshops.
Or more.
So the first one's, or maybe 3 or 4, but the first one's really going to be focused on the diet and how to eat, what to eat, when to eat, all of those things. And then eventually we'll move into the movement, the sleep, the stress, all of that stuff. But the first one, we're going to give you recipes. We're going to walk you through how to meal prep and plan so that you really have all the tools in place to work on that foundation first before we start adding other things on, because we were getting excited and we were like, yes, we should talk about this and that. We're like, that's going to be 10 hours. So we're going to start with the foundation first and really dive into all of the food, which is going to be a fun place to start.
Oh, for sure. And if you can't make us live, we'll record, of course, and you'll be able to watch the replay. So if you can't join us live, don't worry, sign up anyway so that you can get the recording afterwards. And if you have questions, as always, feel free to send them in. We'll answer them live then, or send them in after you've listened and we'll chat them through on the podcast. But do feel free to jump in, even if you can't make it live, because we'll have the recording for you. And then you'll have all the access to the recipes and extras that we give you as well. So you're not going to want to miss it. Even if you can't make it live, you're still not going to want to miss it. So jump in and join us for that. And all the information will be in the show notes. So no matter where you're listening, the links will be down below.
Awesome. If we didn't answer your question, send it to us. But awesome questions. Thanks for sharing with us, asking questions, and just being open to this conversation, because I think this is a really good place to start, just asking those questions and realizing that you're not alone on this journey and that there are a lot of things that you can do to help you feel better during this transition. The average age of menopause is 51, but 8 to 10 years before then is when you start noticing the changes. So it's a good time to just start dialing things in and just taking extra special care of yourself, because you deserve it.
100%. Absolutely. You deserve to have an amazing perimenopause experience, and you deserve to have a healthy, long, happy menopause. So invest in yourself, invest in your health, invest in your future for sure. All right. Thanks for listening, everyone. And we will see you in the next episode, where we're visiting with Dr. Carrie Jones, who's going to talk all about the testing that you need to do for perimenopause. So don't miss it. You're going to want to listen to it. We'll see you next week. Bye for now.
A big shout out and thank you to our sponsors for today's episode, Period Coaching School and Katie Bresek Wellness.
Thanks to you, our favorite bestie, for listening to the Period Besties Podcast, where no topic is TMI. And of course, share this episode with your besties.
Remember to leave us a 5-star review, nothing less than the best for us besties, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
You can follow us on Instagram at Stasha Washburn and at Katie Bresek, or email us at periodbestiespodcast@gmail.com.
Check out more about us at katiebresek.com and periodcoachingschool.com. And of course, check the show notes for free goodies and extras that support this episode.
We'll see you on the next episode.
Bye for now, besties.